Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Short-Term Show special episode series on the high country of North Carolina. So we are going to be doing a 10-episode deep dive into everything you need to know about buying a short-term rental in this market. And we do have a few supplemental materials for y'all to check out over on our website. So any information that you need on pricing of short-term rental properties in this market, you can find it on our website at theshorttermshop.com. You can also find income data thanks to our friends over at airdna.com. You can find that on our website, again, at theshorttermshop.com. If you guys are interested in buying a short-term rental property with a short-term shop agent in this market, you can email us at agents@theshorttermshop.com, or you can join our Facebook group. We've created an amazing community with over 50,000 people where we talk about all short-term rental investing all day, every day. And you can join that. The name of the group is the same title as my book, Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth. And we look forward to seeing you over there. Thanks, y'all. Hey guys, welcome back to the Short-Term Show special episode series on the high country of North Carolina. Today, we're going to talk about what to buy. So we're going to talk about where the best areas to buy are in the high country, what size, what style, everything you need to know about what you're going to be looking for in terms of the property itself. We're discussing numbers and expenses and things like that in other episodes. So this is solely on the property and location itself. So we have a really cool panel here today. I think they are all familiar faces for those of you who have been listening for a while. First one is Julie McCoy, the number 2 OG short-term shop agent. Julie, you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Julie McCoy. I am an agent over in the Tennessee Smokies is my specialty, but I grew up vacationing in Western North Carolina most of my life. And got a cabin in the Maggie Valley area. We're talking about high country today. I love the high country and hope I can contribute.
Thanks, Julie. And next we have Mr. Garrett. I don't know what a ladybug looks like. Simmons. Go ahead, Garrett. Y'all will hear about that story later.
Good to be back on. Yeah, Garrett Simmons, Avery's loan agent in the high country, a part of the short-term shop. Been in about a year and a half, almost. I don't even know now, 15, 16 months. So yeah, have helped a lot of people buy short-term rentals up here, have bought and owned real estate up here, and have gone to school up here and been on and off here for the last decade now, which shows my age. So happy to be on here and diving more in the weeds on STRs up in the mountains.
Thanks, Garrett. And last, we have Brad Burcham, who, now that I think about it, I think he owns in more short-term shop markets than any other short-term shopper. I'm going to have to double check that, but I think that you do. But anyway, I'll let you introduce yourself past that.
That's interesting. I joke with a lot of my friends that my strategy for the last 3 years has been wherever Avery will open an office, that's where I'll buy a cabin or a property. So it's worked out all right so far. So I've owned in high country for almost a year now. I guess I was one of Garrett's first clients up there, and I love it too. It's amazing. It's just close enough to go visit, and it's a really cool place. I'm excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, and I was just making a list in my brain of, I think you're like almost every one. You've got Smokies, you've got high country, you've got Western North Carolina mountains, like our other North Carolina market. You've got Blue Ridge, Gulf Shores, Broken Bow.
Yeah.
That's
Mexico
like
Beach.
Mexico Beach.
Yeah. So what's that?
Wow.
Eight of, I'm like 50% of Avery's markets.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot.
I know. It's
impressive. I'm impressed.
Got to step my game up.
All right. So first things first, most important thing when you're choosing a market and when you're choosing a property with like a sub-market within a market is regulations. So Garrett, can you kind of go over the general regulations of the area? And I consider it 3 areas: Boone, Blowing Rock, and Banner Elk, but add in anything else.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So overall, as a whole, compared to some other markets in the country, there's not going to be a ton of regulations. That being said, there are a couple zones. Really, as far as the town goes, Boone and Blowing Rock are going to have some regulations. The town of Boone has R1 zoning, is going to be something to stay away from. Typically, it's around downtown, around the university. Because we have the university and we have enough local population, some of these neighborhoods are trying to protect the local population, residential neighborhoods, keep college kids out, which those laws is more than two unrelated people, which then actually it's not necessarily no short-term rentals. It's no more than two unrelated people, which is college kids and short-term rentals. So we kind of lump into that same category. So in and around Boone, around the university, you're going to see a lot of those pockets. The entire town of Blowing Rock, if you were in the Blowing Rock city limits, you are going to have, you can't rent less than 28 days. Now, where this gets a little bit interesting is that there are a lot of parts of the town and area that are not part of the town. So there are no county regulations anywhere up here. So for instance, Brad's place, Brad, you got a Blowing Rock or Boone address?
It's Boone. The new construction is going to be Blowing Rock.
So Brad's got a new construction that's Blowing Rock address, but it's not part of the town of Blowing Rock. So he's on well and septic, and he doesn't have to, he can rent short term because it's just part of Watauga County. Now, some people ask, well, what if it ever gets annexed? You have to ask the city to become part of the city. And that's usually like if your well runs dry and you want to tap into the water, et cetera. So there's not really any risk of Brad's, new construction down the road being part of Blowing Rock. So there's a lot. Blowing Rock's a really popular area. So if you can find an area, find a place that has a Blowing Rock address, because every house has to have some sort of address, even if it's not part of that town, then that can be super attractive. So that's something that I would look at. It's safe to say if you're on city water or city sewer and have a Blowing Rock address, you can't rent short term. So that's that's probably the biggest regulation. And then obviously some pockets of Boone. And then once you get out to Banner Elk, there's going to be no city regulations out there in the Beach Mountain, Sugar Mountain, Banner Elk area. That being said, you will sometimes find some HOAs that prohibit short term rentals. Typically, it's going to be in some neighborhoods, some really high end neighborhoods that kind of focus on second home, country club communities, gated communities that really aren't going to cash flow anyway. But again, it's something to think about. Usually listings will do a really good job at advertising that, and you'll be able to see that. But yeah, HOAs is going to be the only other kind of regulation in some of these higher end homes, and then the Boone and Blowing Rock kind of city regulations.
Is Banner Elk unincorporated, or is that an actual town?
Banner Elk is an actual town. There's a couple little like districts. For instance, like Valley Cruces is a really famous kind of historic area district in town, but it's an unincorporated sort of district. So if you have a place in Valley Cruces, you're either going to have a Banner Oak, Sugar Grove, or Vilas address. So that's another thing to think about. I know we can kind of dive into it, but the towns are, you could have a place closer to Boone and Blowing Rock, and it could have a Banner Elk address just because of the way that it's unincorporated and it has to have some sort of address, and because of the, where it is. And so it can be important to just kind of look at a map and be like, all right, where am I actually? Because even Vilas, you might be really in Boone, but Vilas also stretches out close to the Tennessee border, 20 minutes from Boone. So that's something to think about when you're looking at properties.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good segue into my next topic is location. Like, where's the best location? You mentioned having a Blowing Rock address is a really cool thing to have. What other tips in terms of regulations can you share with the listeners? What other tips in terms of location? Yeah. So, I know we've touched about it. It's going to overlap a little bit in a couple of different episodes, but we really kind of have a couple different submarkets. I would say that Banner Elk, Beach Mountain, Sugar Mountain area is going to be really not really seasonal. It's going to be a little more seasonal and a lot more busy in the wintertime because of the proximity to the ski slopes. And those are going to be the big two ski resorts. So, I tell people, as far as people's annual revenue, it's going to be, I think it's pretty similar across the board, but if given the right property, but it's going to be a little bit more seasonal percentage wise. So it really kind of all depends on your goals. If you have a place at the beach that is super summer, the high season's in the summertime, and you want to offset that summer income with something in the wintertime, maybe it's something, a little bit closer to Beach Mountain, Sugar Mountain, Banner Elk, where you're going to see a lot more income in the wintertime. If you're closer to Boone, Blowing Rock, not that you're going to be dead in the wintertime, but in the summertime, it's going to be a little bit busier because people want to be in and around Boone, Blowing Rock. There's not as much reason to be close out to Banner Elk, Sugar Mountain, Beach Mountain. It's going to be a little bit more of a central location. So if you're someone that lives in, I have a lot of clients because it's such a great area to spend time in that will kind of parlay their short-term rental with a second home. So sometimes that really kind of comes down to where you're at, what you're looking for. If you're someone that likes to ski, then maybe you want to actually find a place in Boone or Blowing Rock because you're going to come up a lot in the wintertime and you're not going to sacrifice a lot of your revenue, versus if you hate the snow, then, maybe you'll find somewhere closer to that so you can rent it out in the wintertime. And then in the summertime, when your place is a little bit quieter, you can spend time there and you're not, sacrificing as much revenue. So that's what I would say.
with all that being said, there are certain boxes that you can check that I in my opinion, it doesn't matter the location. Like if you have a really sweet view and our views, not that there's not views in other parts of the mountains, but we are like 3 times as much elevation. So there are, $500,000 views in the right size home. If you have that, you can be a little bit outside of town, or you could be in Todd, or you could be a little bit out, if you have some sort of unique part of, unique property, or it's a river, or, that view is going to be a huge role, play a huge role in your rental revenue and your demand, as well as the price. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but it is, split with a couple different submarkets up here.
Okay. So would you say that there's any one area location wise that makes more or less money, or in any one location that's more desirable overall?
Yeah.
Or okay,
I would say I know we talked about the regulations, and it's interesting. So Boone Blowing Rock, I would say is probably the highest revenue. And part of the reason is because the supply is so much lower, because you have to have a property, like Brad's new place that's, going to be done in the spring, where it's basically in Blowing Rock, but not in Blowing Rock. And so the supply is not a lot lower, and everyone still wants to go to Blowing Rock. So I would say overall, and historically, the home prices and the property values are the highest in Blowing Rock. It's kind of like that name and area and town that gets the most kind of, property values. So yeah, I would say that is probably the highest demand. If you look at AirDNA, all these price labs, it's going to say Boone and Blowing Rock probably are the highest. That being said, if you're a little bit more opportunistic and, you venture out towards Beach Mountain, that's another area where you could argue has been historically the lowest property values, but is changing rapidly as short-term rentals get more popular. So there's a lot more chance that, over the next 10, 15 years, Beach Mountain could be it's the cheapest place to buy something. It's close to the ski slopes. There can be a lot of good views up there. And so that could be something that more long-term, you could get some more appreciation. But you're going to pay a little bit more of a pretty penny in kind of the Boone Blowing Rock area.
So I found something really interesting in that area, that they all tend to have like different personalities. The vibe of Blowing Rock is vastly different from the vibe of Boone. And I feel like the same is true for Banner Elk. Like Boone definitely kind of has that more of that college town, a little more, maybe like young hip / hippie sort of vibe to it. And Blowing Rock seems more upscale. And that's just been my impression of there. So if there's a demographic that appeals to you as a buyer that you feel like you relate more to, or, is more in your guest avatar, that might be a thing to consider as well.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, the Boone now that the area is growing so much, yes, Boone has a reputation of being the, barefoot wearing college kids. There's more than 25,000 undergrad now. So there's a little bit of everything. And, on top of that, you have a ton of people visiting and family and friends that are coming to Boone. So in and around Boone is always going to be super popular. That's where the hospital is. It's where the Walmart is. It's the only place to buy a TV in the whole high country is at the Walmart in Boone. Blowing Rock. Yes. You go to downtown Blowing Rock. You're feeling like no blade of grass is that a place, there's a job, there's someone's full-time job to do something that you didn't even know was a full-time job in downtown Blowing Rock, even if it's just like to polish the street lamps. So yeah, very, Banner Elk kind of has the ski town. And then in the summertime, it's where a lot of snowbirds from Florida have second, third, fourth, 20th homes that have, these houses in these crazy private neighborhoods. And so when you think about the summertime in Banner Elk, you have a lot of kind of older retired people out in that Banner Elk area. Once you kind of get on these outskirts, you have a little bit of these people a little bit of everybody, some people that have a place in the middle of nowhere out in Ashe County. That's kind of where Ashe County is, where a lot of like the glamping, buy a bunch of land kind of trend is going, because the land is a lot cheaper out there. And if you find the right piece of property, there's a lot less restrictions out in the Ashe County, which is a little bit north of Boone. And that can be, there's still some really cool pastoral views, and the New River goes out there. And so that's another kind of little sub area that some people can argue is the next kind of place to develop, the West Jefferson, Ashe County area, which is a little bit north of town.
Side note, I did not know the word pastoral view until like last year at age 33. So
what would you say is a pastoral view?
Like a view of a pasture meadow, kind of. Yeah. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
In public?
I mean, I always think of it as like, you can't really see the mountains, but you can see like far away. Like your house might be up on a little bit of a hill and you're looking over like, Christmas tree farms, or, you don't get that tint of the long range views, but yeah.
Avery, I think I have a pastoral view at my house.
Yes, that's exactly what I would think. Okay, I'm right.
I think listing agents just made that view up to make houses sound better when they're selling.
Sound like something. Yeah.
I love my view, so I'm a fan.
Okay, so we've gone through regulations, location, Boone, Blowing Rock, Vander Elk, and then are there any other little areas that you feel like might be up and coming? Maybe not like the full traffic of some of the other areas, but areas that might be up and coming. A little bit west of Boone, or a little bit northwest of Boone, like the Zionville, really close to the Tennessee border, which is like Mountain City trade. I have a place out in Zionville that is still being renovated that I've put off, but and so that's about 20 minutes north of Boone. That's another area that again has really cool views, a really cool part of town, but is a little bit less like not even a restaurant, no stores. You kind of have to drive 15-20 minutes to get into town. But if you have the right property and it's really cool and people are going to camp out and be there and they're being there to stay at the actual property versus just a place to lay their head, then I've seen some things are going to be a little bit cheaper out there. And so the numbers can still sometimes work in that north kind of part of town. Awesome. All right, let's move on to the type of property. So let's first talk about cabins. Or actually, let me just back up. What type of property is probably the best thing to stick to here? Or are there a number of types of properties? And then I want to hear about, Brad, exactly what yours is out there. Yeah, I would say it's a variety. I talk to people all the time that know more about the Smokies than I do because they own property there and, have started buying there. So I kind of hear a little bit about it secondhand. My overall kind of census or vibe that I've heard is like in the Smokies, it's cabin or bust. You got to have a cabin. Up here, I would say it varies a little bit where sure, we do have the log cabins. It's not going to hurt you to have a log cabin. But the demographic of people that come up and visit here, a lot of the different types of architectural style, it is not a be all end all to have a straight up log cabin. You'll even see a lot of people that don't want the tongue and groove wood everywhere log cabin. You'll see a lot of chalet style looking homes, whether it be, some sort of A-frame or A-frame mix off where you have floor to ceiling glass windows and, sure, you're not going to have a bright pink house that looks like a beach house, but it might have composite siding with some cedar shake gables and, dark gray or dark green siding that, it makes it look like it's a mountain house. Inside might have a lot more modern kind of, a lot more white, a lot more neutral colors where sure you feel like you're at a mountain house because there's an accent wall with, barnwood on it, but you're not necessarily just saturated with tongue and groove wood everywhere log cabins. So some people want that. I would say that it's not going to hurt you if you have a log cabin. At the same time, there's a lot of really cool and nice properties. Some of the highest end homes that people are buying up here might be an all black graphite, composite siding house on top of a mountain with some real cool stone, accents. Another thing is that, like, I know we get into some of these smaller units, 2-bedroom and under, sleeps 4 or less is really popular up here, whether it be an A-frame, whether it be a cool treehouse looking house, whether it be a cool roundhouse on Beach Mountain. So all of those different architectural styles, that might be frustrating for someone to live in full time. If there's a weird spiral staircase up to the loft, or et cetera, it could be really cool for a short-term rental. So that's super popular up here. Condos, I know could be a separate conversation and a separate podcast, but no, go ahead. We're here for
those are super popular up here, especially in the ski resort area. There's one hotel in Avery County and it's a 1-story Best Western. There's a lot of commercial regulations that prohibit the construction over 3 stories unless it's mixed use, or 3 stories is the max with mixed use. And that came from this giant, ugly 8-story, 10-story apartment condo complex on top of Sugar Mountain in the 80s. So because of that, hotels aren't moving in because the regulations can't, they don't let them build up. So if it's just a couple or 4 friends or less that are coming to go ski or snowboard, you're going to stay in a condo because it's kind of a hotel alternative and you can pay a similar price, $100 to $150 a night. But now you got a kitchen, maybe even a view, maybe you're closer to the ski resorts, et cetera. So the condos can be a really good, base hit. You're not going to necessarily get a home run deal on these condos. You're not reinventing the wheel. Some of the complexes are better than others. Most of them were built in the 80s and they're going to be in that Sugar Mountain, Beach Mountain area. Again, can be a really good option for people starting out. HOA fees can cover most of all the expenses, even with utilities. And so it can be a good way to get your feet wet, figure out if you want to manage, if short-term rentals are for you. I have a lot of clients that do that. And so, yeah, condos kind of on the small scale, they do work here. They're great, which I know can vary in some other markets. So yeah, a little bit of everything. But I think the overall gist is it's not a be all end all, has to be a log cabin up in the area.
Yeah, I'm actually a big fan of condos because you can get into a condo in some markets with less competition than you can like a cabin. And I'm only talking about, when I say I'm a fan of condos, I mean, I'm only a fan of condos in areas like this where the entire reason that the condo building exists is for short-term rentals. I'm not talking about condos where a lot of people live, where you're probably going to get regulated out. But in markets like this, I'm a big fan because a lot of people are scared of condos because they're scared of condo fees and they're scared of assessments, but that stuff doesn't bother me. And a lot of times you can get in for a lot cheaper than a comparable single family. But when it comes to HOA fees, you want to make sure that you're looking at what they cover. So if it's like a $500 a month HOA fee, but it doesn't cover anything, that doesn't make sense. But if it covers a lot of things that you would have to pay anyway, like cable and internet, a lot of them cover water and exterior maintenance, and your insurance is going to be less because you're only having to insure what's inside the house or condo. So just look into that before you completely dismiss condos. But anyway, that's kind of cool because a lot of times people think that if it's not a beach community that condos don't work. And in some places they don't, like the Smokies, for example, which I hate to keep comparing to, but that's cool that condos work in this market.
I would say the other thing too, I mean, I know the Smokies doesn't have hurricanes and floods like the beach does, but the master insurance and HOA fees tend to be a little bit lower up here because we don't have the natural disasters that you might see at the beach. So if you got an oceanfront condo, you might be paying like crazy master insurance through their HOA, et cetera, that we don't have up here. The first piece of real estate I ever owned out of college, this was right when Avery, I remember listening to Avery's podcast, the first time she was on Bigger Pockets in like 17 or 18. And I had a condo that I just kind of stumbled into renting it when I didn't live there. It was great. At the time I paid $220 a month in HOA fees, but again, it covered everything from water to electric to, if I was broke. If I needed a new roof, I wouldn't have been able to pay for that, which the HOA fees, kept money in escrow that when, we needed a new deck and a new clubhouse, I got billed $3,000 and they built a brand new club. Everyone in the complex gets billed. So, HOA fees, your CapEx when you're, running numbers can kind of still take a CapEx and use that towards your special assessments because you're still going to need a new, deck, new siding, a new roof. It's just not going to come, you're only paying for a portion of it. And so, I'm a big fan of condos, but it all kind of depends on the right one.
Brad, tell us about the properties that I know you have one existing and you're building another one. What are those like? Like, what's the style of those?
So the one that I have currently is a small, I would say, slightly larger than a tiny home with a fairly steep driveway, gravel driveway that I was a little nervous about. With guests, but it's worked out great. It's actually attracted people to it, I think, being in the mountains. But it's a single shed roof, super modern, kind of painted like what Garrett said with the normal siding for normal construction. Inside, I would say it's finished out pretty high end, like a spa type feel. So I think that also drives people to it. So the new one that's coming is actually the same guy's developing it. So I went under contract with him at the end last fall, I think in November, but it's just a slightly larger version of what I have. So what I have is it's technically a 2-bedroom, but it's really a 1-bedroom with a loft bedroom upstairs and 2 baths. And the one that I'm building is a 3-bedroom with true 3 bedrooms. I added a second floor below that's going to have a really cool hangout space with a spa and a plunge tub and all kinds of amenities that hopefully will drive, like that same spa type feel. I think it's going to crush it even more than the one that I have currently. It's going to do great. I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. All graphite, like graphite kind of dark gray siding, black windows, kind of blacked out, and
tons of windows. The
builder, his first place was basically like, hey, I want to build an actual home that's not a tiny home and make sure it has 2 bathrooms. So there's 2 full bathrooms in it. I think it's 734 square feet or something along those lines. Yep. And the new one's going to be what did Christopher just say? 1,600, 14 to
1,600, I
1,600,
think,
1,600 square feet.
maybe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's something to think about too, where it's like, something like that in Brad's house, people, in some markets, people are talking about price per square foot as far as an appraisal but building up here is so much, there's so many fixed costs that come to building up here that are the same versus Brad's size house versus a, $6 million house. And so the price per square foot obviously is going to be a ton more in something like Brad's house. That being said, the demand for rental revenue is going to be way higher on Brad's 734 square foot 2.2 than maybe a 2.2 condo on Sugar that's even more square feet, 900 square feet, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and it could be bring in less than half of what Brad's does, and the price is going to reflect that. So that's something to think about when you're looking at. It's not all just revenue based on bedroom count. Given the people that are staying at Brad's place are going to pay a premium because they're getting kind of a special experience.
Awesome. So that also segues perfectly. You guys are like, I didn't even send you a copy of the questions that I'm going to ask. You're just like perfectly segueing into my next question every time. So I want to talk about size. So in a lot of markets, the smaller properties have a higher occupancy rate, but sometimes the larger properties, like over 5 bedrooms, there might not be very many of them. So you can potentially have a higher return on investment on the bigger properties because you're just able to charge so much more money. So anyway, what size works, or does it really matter? Does it just kind of depend on what the investor is looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of applies here. I think it's I tell people it's the smaller properties. Absolutely, they're going to, they're hotel alternatives. So because there's not as many hotels, unless you're in Boone, you're going to stay in a smaller property. And even if money's not an object, there's still people that aren't going to rent a 5-bedroom house if there's only them and their wife. It's just not good. It's pointless. So yes, the smaller ones, I'd be interested to see Brad's occupancy in the winter time, given that he is in Boone Blowing Rock. Sure, there's Apski over there, but and see how his occupancy's been. I would say the larger houses the same way. A lot of the larger homes up here are 5-bedroom plus, are going to be in neighborhoods that don't let short-term rentals and like second homes and whatever. So if you can find a 5-bedroom plus house that is in a short-term friendly neighborhood or unrestricted, then you're still going to see super high occupancy because there's not a lot of them. And with all that being said, Brad's building a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that I don't think is going to be a bust. So if you have the right property, I don't think that there's necessarily a box to be like, hey, I have to build a tiny house or build a 6,000 square foot house. It really is kind of property specific.
All right, I had a feeling that was going to be the answer to that. So let's talk about those property specifics. In terms of views, amenities, things that you need to have. So let's start with, what does it absolutely have to have? Like, what are you going to be lacking in income if you don't have it? And then we'll move on to, things to kind of set you apart. So what does every single property have to have?
That's a question that I think could be argued by different people that own or don't own properties up here. Me personally, I don't think there's too many things that is a must-have. You have to have. That being said, because if you get the right property for the right price and the right revenue, I've seen people crush it without a hot tub. Other people are like, you got to have a hot tub. It's like, well, I got this property for X amount. So I would say the must-haves is the same in every market. Your furnishings, I think, have to look really nice and have to be really well thought out and done. And your photography has to be really good, which again, that's beating a dead horse. I think that applies in every market. But up here, especially where, you're buying a lot of properties up here that still have green carpet and plastic on the couch from the 80s. And, you really have to there's a lot of people that it's not necessarily the bear paw print shower curtains. There's a lot more, I kind of call it a modern mountain feel of, the people that are vacationing up here from North Carolina. A lot of them are North Carolina transplants from California, New York. It's a lot of tech people. It's a lot of people that are between my age and 40 that maybe have spent their whole life vacationing in Lake Tahoe or whatever it is. And so that interior, how it's kind of staged, furnished, I think is a necessity. As far as views, I think the top properties up here all have views. That being said, you're going to pay a premium for it. So for instance, Brad's property, his 734 square foot house, you put that on top of a ridgeline, the same house with a 4-state view on the back deck, it could be a $700,000 house. I think he paid $425 for his. And so it's like, you just kind of have to outweigh the numbers on, okay, yes, this property is worth a ton more. Am I going to bring in twice as much or a third of, so it all kind of is property specific, but a view is definitely going to be the biggest determinant of price up here, as well as rental revenue. So it is kind of a catch 22. Value add, you're going to see a lot of houses that need a little bit of cosmetic work. You might have some places that have basements that are unfinished because we're in the mountains. Obviously, there's a lot of basements up here. So that can be something to look out for, even with ADUs or separate garages that could potentially be converted, because garages in a short-term rentals, I think they're better used as game room versus somewhere place for someone to park their car for 2 days. So that's something you can see. Yeah, as far as amenities, I mean, hot tubs, I think you can use, I know you can use year round as far as the weather. Now, how much more it gives is you really kind of probably have to rent it a year without it and have a baseline and then have it. So yes, I definitely think if you have a hot tub, that's going to be value add. That being said, again, it's not one of those things where, we just had Joe on, he doesn't have hot tubs in any of his units and crushes it. I know he has plans to put them in, but it's not necessarily something where it's like, hey, I need to put a hot tub before I put this live. I would not say that that's a necessity. I mean, Brad doesn't have one at his one unit. Not to say that they're not value added, but I don't necessarily think they're necessary. Yeah, Brad, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, it's funny because in every other market that I own, like the number one question you get pretty much year round, even in the summertime in Blue Ridge, and it's 107 degrees, the first question you get is, will the hot tub be functioning or is the hot tub working? Which blows my mind. But the Smokies in Blue Ridge, you have to have it. If you don't have it, you're lost. You're going to the bottom of the list. But like you said here, the first one, it's super close to the university and to town and to the Walmart where people can buy a TV and all those things. It's literally 3 or 4 minutes from all those locations. So I think that, and the inside of the cabin is finished super high end and has that spa feel. So that, I think, is just a trade-off for the hot tub. I do think I might do slightly more, but I very rarely have anyone ask, do you have a hot tub? It's funny because in every other market, that's the number one the first question you get. So I am going to put a hot tub at the 3-bedroom because I think there will be larger groups there and more hanging out at the property. And I just think it will drive more revenue there in the 3-bedroom, but on the smaller 1 or 2-bedroom, I don't know that it's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, and that's a good point. I think in some of these smaller properties, it's going to be a little bit less necessary than some of these bigger properties where you have a ton of people. If you have a couple come in, like Avery hates hot tubs, there's going to be someone like, Avery and Luke come stay at your house and they're not going to get in the hot tub. But if Avery and Luke rent a bigger house and there's 8 people, 6 of those people might want to get in the hot tub. And so Avery might be asking, not for her, but for the other 6. And so, yeah.
All right. So a view is preferable, but you don't have to have a view to perform well, right?
Yeah. I mean, the price you pay for a property is going to be significantly less than one that has a view. And so if the numbers could still make sense without a view. That being said, I think, the top performing properties, they all have views, but you're going to pay a premium for it. So you just kind of have to outweigh that. And there's layers of views. Like Brad, there's seasonal views. Like, I don't know, Brad, do you kind of have a winter seasonal view at Rabbit Run? I would say it's moderate. It's not like eye popping, amazing view, but it is. There's definitely a view this time of year. There's something there. Then in the springtime, summertime, there's just leaves. So there's definitely layers and levels to the views.
Yeah, I've come up with a very scientific way to quantify a long range mountain view and just, kind of a whatever view. I call them majestic views or cute views. So the majestic views are where you can see, way off. You could see a lot of peaks, and then cute views are where okay, you can tell you're in the mountains. Like you can see some hills, but it's not crazy.
I'm still trying to figure it out from a word standpoint because I think there's views that the camera does it justice where it's like, okay, yep, it looks like what the camera shows. And then I've been up here forever and I'll get on back porches and I'll be like, I'll take a video of the house or something and I'll be talking. I'll be like, now you gotta understand this camera doesn't this is a different view. Makes you feel like you feel like you're on top of the world. There's that kind of separate level to oh wow, this is I think layered, sometimes long range layered views is sometimes what people say.
Yeah, there's lots of words.
I say multi-state view. You can
Oh.
see in a lot of these places, you can see North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee.
Oh, that's
And
pretty cool.
some places, Georgia, depending on where you are.
Oh, that is cool.
Even Georgia from up there?
Yeah, it depends. That's more kind of towards the Asheville area, but yeah.
Wow.
Well, we don't get that in the Tennessee side, really. Not where we are anyway.
So what about, this isn't technically an amenity, but something that I want people to kind of pay attention to as they're looking for properties, steep roads. What is that? What's the road situation or driveway situation when you're looking at properties? Because right now we're talking about, we've got a whole episode, guys, later on like things to do to set yourselves apart once you already own the property. But I'm talking about here what you're looking for when you're buying. So what's the deal with roads and steepness and potential, drop-offs over the side?
Yeah.
All that. What are we looking for?
I'll let Brad take this because I know he can speak firsthand. He's got a steep driveway.
Yep. So I would say as a general rule of thumb, Avery, all of the main roads and even the neighborhood roads, like my neighborhood roads, it's paved all the way to my driveway. So I would say there are steep curving roads to get there, but it's nothing that you don't need a Bronco to get there. You can get there in a Honda Civic. And I have two options for parking. I have one at the top of the driveway, and then I make it blatantly clear on my listing that if you go down in the driveway, it's a 4x4 only, all seasons, all year round. And if there's even a hint of snow, don't go down in the driveway. So it has worked. I was pretty nervous about that because that's the first one that I've had that is gravel and super steep, and it has not deterred anybody. And I think it has actually attracted people as long as you blatantly. It's one of the first things I put in my listing that it's 4x4 only. So I would say the general rule of thumb that most people that come up there kind of expect it, kind of like when you go skiing in Park City, you kind of expect to get an all-wheel drive car. People kind of expect it. So it definitely hasn't deterred anyone from staying, but obviously if you could have a less steep driveway, then that would be preferable. But to get the good views and to be in the good locations, you're probably going to trade that. It's going to be a trade-off. So mine is super close to town, but it feels like it's out in the middle of nowhere because it's surrounded by trees and forest and has one of the cute views, as Avery would say. It's not right. It's cute. It's cute-ish.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's a great analogy of when you go out to Breckenridge and you fly into Denver and drive to Breckenridge, you're not renting a Honda Civic. You're like, yeah, there's a great chance there's going to be snow. Now, sure, we're not even that much, we don't get that much snow, but people expect that. Hey, you come from you're coming from these areas that might get dustings once a year. And they're like, hey, we're going to the mountains. Like, we're going to take our 4x4 car. And sure, you're always going to have idiots that try to go down your driveway in a Honda Civic. And, I have actually found the most resilient people that can get anywhere is the cleaners. And they all drive like little Honda Civics. And I'll have people be like, hey, my cleaners got down and out in their Civic. So, but another good point is those views. No one goes downhill into a valley to have a long range 3-state majestic, you name it, long layered view. They expect to go up to get the view. So, if people know that what they get, it's kind of like one of those, kind of like going on a hike. You're like, hey, this sucks, but I'm going to go up and have a really cool view. And it can attract people when there's like, hey, it's almost like their adventure and experience starts just getting to the cabin, which again can be a pain in the butt for some people. But if you advertise it and swing it on your listing of being like, hey, this is a 4x4 only, off the grid cabin in the woods kind of thing, people are going to eat that up and they're like, oh, this is cool. And they're going to talk about years to come how crazy it was just to get to the cabin, in some capacities in some areas. So it can definitely be a marketing tool and can be a amenity if you swing it right and are prepared for it.
Well, and then you self-sort the guests too. Like the people who are afraid of that, who don't want that, as long as they know, then they're not renting your house. And that's fine, right? Because then you don't get the people who are complaining about it.
Right. If I have 4-wheel drive only blasted all over my listing and page, and then someone leaves me a bad review, be like, I got stuck, I couldn't get up there. And anybody with a pulse is going to look at that bad review and then look at the listing and like, this guest is crazy because it's blasted everywhere that is an off the grid 4-wheel drive only kind of place. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the thing to remember here is if you want the view, you have to go up the mountain. And things are steep on mountains. So
Yeah.
as long as I don't think that that a property that has a steep driveway is a deal breaker. I don't think that's a reason to not buy a property. I think, like you said, you just make sure that you are announcing that a number of different ways so that because people don't read. So if you only put it one place in your listing, they're probably not going to read it. So you have to make sure that it's several different places. But one of ours, like our top performer, is it's not the newest, nicest cabin in the whole world. And it's on an absolutely terrifying road that if you've listened to any of my other podcasts, you've probably heard the story about Luke having a panic attack on this road the first time that we went up it and stopping the truck. And I'm having to get out and walk. And he said he was going to walk down and a helicopter is going to have to come get the truck, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so that one is our top producer. And we just make sure that everybody knows the road is really scary. And so far it's been like, we've owned that one since 2016 now, and the reviews have been great. So you just have to set that expectation. So it's not a reason to not buy something. The last question that I have is when it comes to searching for value add properties. So are there any tips, tricks, advice that you have for the types of properties that typically make good value add? So for example, like the roundhouses, I know a lot of those that are, when they're pre-rehab, they're significantly cheaper. So is there anything you would tell people to look for in terms of, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can really add some value to this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's enough properties that people have done them kind of right to look at kind of what my house should look like when it's done. Like any other sort of value add rehab, I would say budget for more than you think. A lot of these roundhouses were built in the 80s and the construction's kind of a little funky and weird. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of not straightforward, but a lot of these properties, yeah, they're 1,000 square foot roundhouse. What you see is what you get. And, make sure you have experience with, construction and renovation, all that. It can be, figuring out, I think the biggest thing with value add up here is figuring out, or new construction is figuring out when you're buying it and, when you're going to do the rehab, because the seasons are crazy up here and bipolar. And in the summertime, it's springtime, it could be super wet and rainy. In the wintertime, if you're not dried in to do something, you're going to spend, it's going to be weeks or months where you can't do anything because there's snow and everything's frozen and it's just nasty weather. So I would think is the big thing. I wouldn't say there's anything necessarily special up here as far as value add than any other market. Figure out how much money something takes and what the ARV is going to be. And there's enough comps to kind of show that and work from there. But kind of figuring out when you're buying and your timetable, I think is going to be important. Well, I mean, I think the garages, I mentioned that. Mm-hmm. That can be something, where, hey, something with a garage can be a game. I have a client that's buying a house now with a big, giant RV garage that is huge that they're going to turn into something. I have a value add that I bought that didn't have well or septic. It was just an old hunting cabin with nothing. And so that was obviously a bigger value add, almost like new construction. That can be something too. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get creative. I also will say, depending on where you are, the building regulations just aren't necessarily as crazy. I don't think they're a little bit more than Tennessee. I heard that's like the wild, wild west. But so just kind of look at what you're buying. It's not necessarily, you're going to be buying decks are a huge thing where you buy a deck before 2000 and there was no code on building a deck. So it's just janky 4x4s going 20 feet up when anybody and their mother would tell you now it's got to be 6x6, 8x8s, no ground contact, whatever. So that's probably something that can be a really big expense that people don't think about. Oh, I'm just going to paint it or stain it. But if you need a new deck, that could be a $20,000 to $40,000 job, depending on how big it is and stores and levels.
Hey, Avery, something I've noticed a lot up there, and Garrett can probably speak to this too, is that there are a lot of older, I guess bungalows, the right word, or older houses that were probably built in the 30s to the 60s that have been, a lot of people have bought them and rehab, I guess, value add. There's several restaurants that are that way that are super cool. So I'm not a handy person, and I'm more of a new construction type person. But if you are and you're into that, there are some opportunities there where those don't exist, like in the Smokies and Blue Ridge. You have to have more of a traditional cabin in those markets. But here, I do think, like I've noticed a bunch in Banner Elk as I've driven through that they are super cool and can definitely, they can probably be purchased for half what I paid, but you're going to have to put 100 or 150 in it and probably spend the same amount as what I spent. It's going to end up being super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of districts, especially out in that Banner Elk Valley cruises, that are on the historic list in towns, and,
Yep.
Daniel
There's
Ben's
some old
cousins,
farmhouses
mothers.
that people have remodeled. I know some farmhouses like out in the middle of the field with a pond, that can be super cool on Airbnb. So,
Doc Watson's cousin's mom's house lived there, or whatever it was. Yeah.
With those houses that are on the historical registry, are there a lot of regulations about how you can rehab them? I know there are certain districts that can be really strict about that.
Yeah, there are. I would say it's not necessarily not as many houses are on the historic list. A lot of them are just old. But the ones that are, yes, there's some development things that you need to check with planning inspections on how you're going to renovate it. You can't. The biggest thing is you can't tear it down and change the overall aesthetic of, like, you can't build a modern Brad's house on a historic whatever. You got to, play by the rules.
Gotcha. All right. Well, in closing, is there anything else that we may not have covered that you feel like the listeners really need to know when it comes to what to buy in the high country?
I think we kind of touched on it all. Yeah, overall, I mean, I think another thing that people don't necessarily talk about as much when we talk or in the short-term space is kind of market appreciation. They think, we think cash flow, rental revenue, et cetera. This is an area that has just been overdeveloped, continually developed, even pre-COVID, just because of the growth of North Carolina and who's coming up here. And so you have a lot of people. It's not just short-term rentals that have up here, whether you have full-time residents or second home, vacation home people. So that's something to think about when you're buying, if you're thinking long-term on, how's my house going to appreciate. Condos typically don't appreciate. I bought a condo for $40,000 in 2018. That same condo I just sold to somebody for 160. And so seeing 4 times, obviously that was just general craziness, but we saw a lot of appreciation even before COVID hit and before the market took off, just because there's only so much land up here. It's really hard to build up here. And everyone still has a demand and the inventory's low. So that's the only other thing to think about, but I think we covered kind of most of everything.
Well, I thought of something though with new construction. Do you see a lot of new construction? Brad's obviously building a couple, but is that common or not really?
Yes, no, it's funny you say that. My brother is now a builder up here. He's finishing up his first project, and we're trying to build some stuff together because there's a need for that. It's tough. It's trickier to build up here, so the barriers to entry are a little bit harder. It's really harder to build small properties and make money because there's a lot of fixed costs. I know we talked about it. So when a property like Brad's comes on for $425, $450, that builder, unless it's, they're building a ton of them right next to each other, they're going to have more margins building a $1.5 million house that someone's going to buy, whether it's a short-term investor or just a second homer. So yes, if you find new construction, there's a lot of hoops to jump. Everyone and their mother wants to buy land and put an Airstream or buy whatever, but septic and well is a huge thing. And grading a driveway, doesn't change versus the size of the house. So I would say the new construction is definitely popular and there's a demand for it. But the supply is definitely super low, and hopefully that'll change in the next couple of years, but it's only 2 of us. We're starting small.
All right. Well, if nobody has anything else, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Guys, if you have more questions on this market, or if you want to work with Garrett, there's a few ways to do that. The first would be to email agents@theshorttermshop.com. Or if you have more questions, we do a weekly investor Q&A at strquestions.com to sign up. Thanks, everybody.